Aua. Ah. What an unpleasant day to get some sunshine in the morning. That's right. You heard that. Even though there's no sun, you should go outside and get some light. Because why? Well, today's lecture is going to be all about sunlight. Let me break it down for you. Let us go inside. So looking at sunlight in general, we need to first understand the physical perspective. Well, we know that it comes from the sun, but let us look its very nature. Sunlight is an electromagnetic radiation that is emitted by the sun. It is composed of roughly 40% of infrared light and 60% of ultraviolet light. The sunlight can be described either as a wave, which means by its wavelength, frequency, or even amplitude. Or it can be described as a particle, so by its stored energy, which comes from the momentum of photons. Don't worry about photons. Photons are just those almost massless particles that can travel almost at light of speed. And they can penetrate almost everything, let's say. But yeah, let's continue. So depending on the spectrum of the sunlight can emit infrared light, which is roughly above 700 nanometers, and ultraviolet light, which is under 400 nanometers. Both of these extremities are not visible for the human eye, so you cannot say that the sunlight is emitting UV or ER just with your eye, because firstly, it is impossible to distinguish the difference between those different lights, and secondly, it is not in the visual spectrum. But how does sunlight interact with objects in general? Sunlight can either be reflected, absorbed, or transmitted by the object, depending on the composed material of the object and its color. Some materials can either be good at absorbing sunlight, meaning absorbing heat, because light can also be described as energy. Others are optimal at reflecting sunlight. Let us take plants, for example. Plants are able to absorb, reflect, and transmit light, because plants contain the what's so-called chlorophyll, which is the green pigment that plants have that is essential for their photosynthesis. So now the question is, what does sunlight really do when it interacts with humans? UV and ER can be partially reflected from the outer surface of the skin and eyes. As it penetrates the tissue of our skin, it can be dissolved in various directions, even backwards. Those separations happen due to the microscopic particles and structures such as fibers that are present, for example, in the dermis of the skin. But the skin can also absorb the radiation due to various molecules. In general, visible radiation, as we have seen before, which is the sunlight that can have a wavelength between 400 to 700 nanometers, are not well absorbed by the bulk tissue, which are the oval layers of the skin, but can be strongly absorbed by the skin pigments and blood. But what exactly does contribute all this absorption of the sunlight in the skin? So apart from the visible spectrum and its effects, what about ER and UV? Well, ER is the radiation with the longer wavelengths. So generally, the longer the wavelengths of the radiation is, the better it is able to be absorbed by the soft tissue of the skin, that is called the hypodermis, which contributes mainly to have this heat sensation when sunlight is exposed to the human body. Of course, keep in mind, the skin color plays a big role here, where UV, on the other hand, has a shorter wavelength that contributes strongly on the absorption of the sunlight by the bulk tissue of the skin, or let's say by the epidermis of the skin. For example, by organic molecules like proteins, lipids, or even DNA. So mainly absorbed UV and ER is not only going to be converted into heat, but they can also create photochemical reactions in our body. Considering that, because the shorter wavelengths of the UV radiation, the excitation of the electrons increase significantly, which initiates most photochemical reactions in the skin and eyes that can damage the proteins and DNA either by direct absorption or by reactive oxygen molecules, which are unstable molecule species that are generated from another UV absorbing molecule. But fortunately, our skin is well protected and adapted to UV induced damage because damaged molecules or cells are quickly repaired and replaced. We know what it does, but the most important thing, of course, what are the benefits from it? So from all the explanations, it is now worth talking about it. So getting exposed by UVB, which is basically UV from sunlight, so ultraviolet light, with a wavelength between 219 and 350 nanometers, it can produce pre-vitamin D3 in our body, which basically becomes vitamin D3 as we know, which was previously converted due to the sunlight absorption by 7-dihydrocholesterol. So yeah, we know that absorbed UVB can actually produce vitamin D3, but what is it good for? Well, vitamin D is essentially good for bone health and inhibiting certain cancers. Of course, for those people who live in the basements because you are too afraid of the world outside, like SpongeBob, you can get supplementation of vitamin D3. But it also depends on the geographical latitude, ground altitude, smoke, cloud cover, or even sunscreen, where UV intensity and vitamin D3 production can significantly be affected by it. But there are some studies who have shown that sunlight is also beneficial for mental clarity and mood. Also good for blood circulation, which can also reduce muscle and joint pain. But looking now in a more general perspective, how much sunlight does one individual need to have to get a very good or optimal vitamin D3 production? Well, there's actually several studies about this. One study that has been made in Valencia, Spain, where they recommend people to get at least 8 to 10 minutes of sun exposure at noon during the summer when people have less clothing on them, and about 2 hours at noon in the winter when people are wearing more clothes for general optimal vitamin D production. But that also depends on the skin color of one individual. Of course, some might have darker skin color, which means in the winter they should get even more than 2 hours of sunlight. Others might have lighter skin color who need probably less time of sun exposure. This is all due to the melanin in the skin and its pigments. Some skin colors absorb better radiation, others don't. But what about the sunlight exposure in the morning that everybody is talking about? There are tons of studies that have been conducted on morning sunlight exposure, which concluded beneficial health effects for one individual. Morning sunlight can improve circadian rhythm, which is the body's internal clock for sleeping, that can be regulated or even improve sleep quality. Furthermore, getting sunlight in the morning can also produce melatonin at the appropriate time, before sleeping, for example. What is now better for health optimization, infrared or UV? Both are considered as optimal for health when being exposed in moderate amount, of course. There's no such thing as saying this radiation is better than the other one, or vice versa, but for great health optimization, both have their benefits, depending always on the amount of the time or on how strong the sunlight is hitting you. Because we know that getting too much of it can actually increase skin cancer or skin wrinkles or other negative side effects. In conclusion, whether there is sun outside or not, you should go outside and have some light into your skin. Because it is not the sun itself that boosts your vitamin D production, but generally the radiation from the light, regardless if it's UVB or ER. Don't think about skipping morning sunlight and rather stay at home because it is more comfortable or cozier. Just go out, even if it's just for 5 minutes, and have some light. As everything, do not put sunscreen every time when the sun is shining, but do not think now to embrace sunlight until you look like an overfried fish stick. Generally, sunlight is awesome. You should not avoid nor ignore its danger. For that said, go outside and breathe some air and be friends with the one who basically keeps us alive.